Hello. Today's lecture will focus on Microsoft Access. Microsoft Access is probably the hardest part of this course as far as Office products go, simply because most people are not familiar with it. Microsoft Access is a database product. Databases are incredibly powerful tools. However, they are more complex, perhaps more difficult to use than spreadsheets. So spreadsheets get abused for a lot of things that would actually be better done in a database. Most databases, including Microsoft Access, are relational. This means that they support certain operations such as join. The relation in relational actually refers to mathematical relations, and those are a very interesting topic. However, they are outside the scope of this course. So let's take a look at an Access database. Here's an Access database. You can see this table here. It looks somewhat similar to a spreadsheet. However, if you try to move down, you notice that you can't. There are 0 rows in this table, and so you can't move to a new row. So the similarity here to Excel, don't let it confuse you. This is a different program. Sort of like Excel's different sheets, databases have one or more tables. They also have things such as queries and reports and forms, which are based on those tables. But let's talk about tables first. One type of table that you might want in a database is perhaps a list of salesmen, say employees of a company, salesmen, a table that is just a list of salesmen's names, their employee IDs, perhaps the total value of their sales in the past year, something like that. So let's get started with this. By default, a table will have one field, the ID field, and by default the type of that field is auto number. Excel kind of has types too, but Access enforces types more rigorously than does Excel. So you can see here the different types of a field: short text, long text, number, date, time, currency, yes, no, hyperlink. These are defined by Access, and the type of a field affects the way that it is stored on disk, because databases can grow to be very large. That's another difference with spreadsheets. Spreadsheets have a fixed limit of, I think, 65,000 rows. There are databases out there with many more than 65,000 rows. So before we get started entering data into the table, we need to define the fields of the table. So to do that, I'm going to right click on here and I'm going to go to Design View. Now it asks me to save this. So it wants me to give a name to this table, so I'll give this name, this table, the name of Sales Employees. And you can see here, this field, you have field name and you have data type. So let's call this Employee ID. And because we're going to assign employee IDs, we don't want the type to be auto number. Auto number is a very special type. It can only, it's hard to make something auto number. The key field of a table starts out auto number. and you can change it to something else, but it's difficult to change it back to auto number after you've changed it. Now this key right here means it's a key field. So what a key field is, it's the primary key. Every table, well, not every table, many tables have a primary key. A primary key is a field of the table that is unique across all rows in the table. So by making employee ID the primary key, we're saying that no two employees will have the same employee ID. And the database will enforce that assertion. If we try to give a row an employee ID which conflicts with another employee, the database simply will not let us do it. So the employee ID, we're going to make that a number. And you get to choose the exact length of the number here. You can make it long integer, integer, single, double. These are different types of numbers. So I'm going to make this an integer. This, the lookup tab, we're not going to talk about that. It's not really important for anything. Alright, so we've got the employee ID. What else might we want to put in a sales employees table? Well, how about name? Or let's make it first name. First name of them. And that is going to be short text. Field size maximum. You're going to be asked to change this. This is actually an important field because text fields can take quite a bit of space if you leave them alone. 255 characters, that is, I think that's 16 bytes. No, that's 255 bytes, because each character is a byte. So yeah, so most people won't have first names longer than, let's say, 20 characters. And so we'll enforce that there. Now let's do last name. Also short text. Now some people have really long last names, so let's let that field size be 30 characters. And what this is saying is that, when this is stored on disk, each record is going to have 30 characters devoted to the name. Whether or not you're actually using those characters, they have to be stored on disk. So that's why your assignments will make you change this field. Alright, so we've got the first name and last name. What else might we want? How about phone number? Now you might be tempted to make this a number, but I don't think that's a good idea, because phone numbers, yes, they're numbers, but it doesn't make sense to do comparisons on them, like compare one phone number to another, see which one is bigger. They're really more textual. And so let's make that a short text field and make it 10 characters. And that actually makes the phone number smaller than a comparable number would be. So we've got the employee ID, the first name, the last name, the phone number, and now let's make a last field and call it annual sales. So let's set the data type to that. It defaults to short text. Let's make it currency. Format currency, blah blah blah. So, oops, changed the wrong thing here. Make this short text. We already said that that's 10 because we have 10-digit phone numbers in the US. Annual sales, we want that to be currency. And I'll just leave it like that. So now we've designed this table. So let's go back and open it up in the normal view. So here's our normal view now. So now we're going to write a whole bunch of information about our salesman. So employee ID, we're going to put 1, tab over, first name, Brian, last name Smith, phone number, I will use the standard 555 thing to make sure I don't put any phone numbers. Don't call these phone numbers anyway. They're 555, so you can't call them, but don't. And annual sales, let's say 50,000. Employee ID, let's call this employee ID 2. Karen Andrews. Make up a phone number. Annual sales 65,000. No, not 650,000. That's not what I wanted. Delete one of those. Alright. And I'll make about 10 of these, and there's not much to say. So these two are married, let's say, and so they have the same phone number. And that's okay, because, and I keep on, and that's okay, because the phone number doesn't have to be unique. However, I can't give them the same employee ID. If I try, the database will stop me. So you'll get this error right here, because the employee ID is the primary key. Can't have duplicates. So Elizabeth Jennings has to have a separate name. You know what? I don't like that name. No, I don't want to turn on sticky keys. I'll say Smith. I don't know, just Xavier Zimmer just didn't work for me, but I already have a Smith. There. Okay. I'm going to change that later. You can go back and change these things. You can leave a field blank, like for the last name. Probably shouldn't, because most people do have last names, but that is something you can do. A lot of these phone numbers are similar to each other. It's just... You can fast forward through this part if you want. I can't... can't actually stop recording for technical reasons, but you can fast forward till I have all 10 in here. So I won't talk anymore. The reason I'm leaving them blank is I'm actually having trouble coming up with believable last names, believe it or not. So I'm going to come back when my creativity is better. Alright, now let's fill in all these last names. Alright, so we've got our sales employees now. So that table is done. And by the way, to save this, yes, click save, but in order to really save the database, you have to go here and you have to go to compact and repair. Compact and repair does some I'm just going to click no to that. You probably won't see that. The reason that you're seeing this is because of where it's stored. I haven't actually given this a name yet. So let me save it as save database as access database. Save as. And I'm going to go ahead and save it to my access folder, and I'll call this sales. And this is taking a while, but it's done now. So now we have a number of things to talk about. We have to talk about queries, reports, and forms, and we have to talk about relations between different tables. Specifically foreign key relations, which are referred to in Access as one-to-many relations. So to do that, let's create another database. Let's create a database of customers. And this customers database we will use to demonstrate foreign key relations. So first, to create a new database, to create a new table, you go here to create, and you just click table, and a new table comes up. So we've got our table here, so let's name it Alright, so Access has some restrictions on it. The way to actually name this table is to try to save it. And when you go to save it, it asks you to give it a name. So now we can name this table Customers. And it's saving. It probably won't take this long for you. The reason it's taking this long is because it's on a network share. Alright, so now we've got our customers database. And in order to set it up, we again go to Design View. This customers field, it starts with ID. And let's call that customer ID. And let's leave it an auto-numbered field. So now we'll do basically the same thing before. First name, short text, change it to 20 characters. Last name, short text, make the field up to 30 characters long. One thing we're doing differently here is we're leaving the customer ID auto-numbered. And let's put a phone number in there too. 10 characters for that. And finally, the last field we're going to put here is salesman, or let's call it sales handler. And this, let's make a number. We're going to come back to that later. Or actually not later. Let's go ahead and talk about it right now. If you open up the relations pane and you open these two tables, now when you're asked in the Access project that you're doing for the exam, make sure that you are opening up tables and not queries. You should only have relations between tables. You shouldn't have relations between queries. So we've opened up both tables here, and now we can close this. Now if you'll notice, customers has ID and nothing else, even though we've just changed it. Well, we haven't saved the changes, so we have to go ahead and save it, and that's going to take a little time again. We're saving this table. And now that we've saved that table, now we can set the relations up. So the relation we're going to set up is we're going to set up a relation between the sales handler on the customer side and the employee ID on the sales employee side. Table, employee ID, related table, relationship type one-to-many, that is what we want. Enforce referential integrity. We want to make sure to check that, because that is what makes Access tell us when we're doing something wrong in relation to this relationship. And so let's go ahead and create it. Alright, database engine cannot lock table customers because they're already in use by another person or process. That's easy enough to fix. We have to cancel this, and then we have to close the customers field. Now that it's closed, now we should be able to go ahead and create this. Enforce referential integrity. Create the relation. Employee ID, it has to be the same type. Maybe I forgot to make it the right type. Let's take a look at that. So I double-clicked this to open it up, switch to design view, and sales handler is number, and I have long integer here. I think the type of the employee ID was just integer. Save changes to the design, yes. And so now I think I should finally be able to create that relationship. So you can see there's a lot of little things that can go wrong when you're working with Microsoft Access. If something goes wrong, look at the error message and try to figure out what it's telling you and how you might be able to fix it. So now, sales handler to employee ID, enforce referential integrity, create. And now I think it will work. Yes, it will. And so this is the one, and this is the many. So for every one row in here, there could be many or no numbers here. The reason for this is that every customer is handled by a sales employee, but sales employees can handle more than one customer, and not every sales employee has to have any customers at all. Maybe they just started or something. So now that we've done this, when we add things to the customers table, and I just double-clicked to open it here, it's going to force us to use an employee ID that is one of these employee IDs. So we've made the relationship. Let's go ahead and close that. Do you want to save the changes? Again, yes. Access likes to save individual changes to parts of the database. That's because in big databases, you can have multiple people using the same database at the same time. So it locks tables and then releases locks on tables. It has to do with the fact that this is kind of a heavy-duty program, the reason it asks you questions like that so much. So this is pretty easy. The employee IDs all have numbers between 1 and 10. So we just have to give the sales handler a number between 1 and 10, and then that will make it happy. So remember, this is auto number, so I can't type anything here. I'm trying to type a number here, and it's not letting me. Sales handler, let's leave it 0. Alright, now it says you cannot add or change a record because a related record is required in table sales employees. 0 is not a valid sales employee ID, and because of that relationship that I just set up, it's not going to let me put a 0 here. I also can't put 11 here. Get the same message. It has to be a number between 1 and 10 because those are the IDs of the sales employees. So let's call it 7. Okay, that makes Access happy. So now and it gave her customer ID of 1. Auto number it keeps on basically going up. It gives everything you add to this table the next number, starting with 1. So this is going to be 2, and it's going to automatically number it for us. So let's have some more customers, and I have looked up the most common names in the United States on my phone. You can't see it because I did it on my phone, so that I can go through here and not have to think up reasonable sounding names. So this will go a little bit faster. Sales handler 4, and I'll go ahead and I'll make 10 customers just because why not? 10's a nice number. But one thing I do want to show you here is that sales, you can put duplicates here. So 2 customers can have the same sales handler because, well, why not? There's no prohibition against that. That was the one-to-many relationship. If this were a one-to-one relationship, then we wouldn't be able to do that. A one-to-one relationship would mean that duplicates would not be allowed here. So again, this data entry part, it's a big part of actually using Access. You're going to be spending a lot of time on it, but if you want to skip over it here, I am perfectly okay with that. So here I made a mistake and forgot to change the sales handler, so let's make this employee 5. 5 doesn't have an employee. I tried to type 9 there, and that's why it didn't let me. And let's use, so this is the last one. 1 again. Alright, so we're now done entering customer records. We've got 10 customers. Probably in real life we'd have more than that, but I don't want to waste your time and mine going through and just typing data into Access. I think there are a few things to keep in mind, like it might stop you. Access might not let you enter something if you put in invalid data. That is something that Excel will not do. You can put junk into Excel and it will never complain. You can't put junk into Access if you configure Access correctly. That's one thing that databases give you. It's called data validation. And so by setting up that one-to-many relationship, we set up a validation check here to make sure that we were putting correct employee IDs into this field. We can't put a junk employee ID here. Access will check with the sales employees table and make sure that it matches one of these employees. And so now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and close this, close both of these, save any changes, and I'm going to talk to you about queries next. So tables are what hold the data in a database. Queries are, simply put, how you use it. So in order to do a query, we go to Create here, and we go to either Query Wizard or Query Design. Query Design is more versatile, so I'm going to go ahead and do Query Design here. So a query is on one or more tables. You use one or more tables in the query. And so I'm just going to use the customers table in this query. So the table shows up here. This is where you take a look at the different fields and you set up the different criteria for the query. So let's say we want to find all customers with a first name of Katie. We want that to be the query. Well, that's what we just set up here. Each of these is a different criteria that has to be satisfied in the query. And so this functions as an AND. If you have something that says AND here, and let's say sales handler has to be equal to 2 or something like that, then both of these have to be true for the query to work. So to actually run the query, go to Datasheet View, and nothing matched that query because whatever customer had a first name of Katie didn't also have a sales handler of 2. So let's go back to the design view and let's delete this completely. Delete this query completely, make it so that it just doesn't exist anymore. Now this query should return something, and it does. First name of Katie. Well, let's say we want to see all of the information about Katie. Let's say we want to see her last name too, and who her sales handler is, and what her phone number is. Then we put last name in here, and then we put phone number in here, and then we put sales handler in here. And so now we'll see all of these fields. Now, we could use this to do additional criteria, restrict more what's returned by the query. But as long as we don't put as long as we leave the criteria blank, we're not imposing any additional restrictions. So let's go ahead and take a look at the datasheet view, and lo and behold, we've got all of Katie's data here. Now, because of this view right here, where it looks kind of like a spreadsheet, a lot of people will get queries and tables confused. Queries are like secondary things that exist in the database. Queries are like the second level of a building, and tables are the first level. You can't have a query unless you have a table behind it. Now, Access will actually let you create queries on queries. So you can run one query, and then you can run another query which uses the first query as a base. This gets confusing really fast, and it's not something that we are going to do in this class. You will never run a query on a query. So make sure that you don't try. If you go here and click this, trying to figure out exactly show table. That's what I wanted. To add so this is an important point. To add additional tables, you go to show table here. And so we've already added the customers table. If we try to add the customers table again, this happens. You don't want this to happen, so go ahead and delete all of these because they don't need to be there. You should only include a table once. If we want to also include the sales employees table in the query so that we can see information about the sales employees, then we select this. What we could do here, if we messed up, would be to add a query to the table. So we go to show table, go to queries, and if we have another query in this same database, it would be possible to run a query on that query. That's never the right thing to do. So make sure you're not doing that. Okay? Just make sure that you never go to this tab when you're choosing tables to include in a query, because you never want to run a query on a query, not in this class. Alright. So, now that we've got all this set up, I would like to talk a little more about how this works down here, how this view works. So we've got each one of these is a field, and each one of these can restrict what is shown in the query. So this field, because of this criteria, Katie, only shows customers with a first name of Katie. If we delete this, then this query has no restrictions, and it will show everything in the customers table, show all 10 of our customers. Now, one thing that's not being shown here is the customer ID. I did not include that. Why didn't I include that? Well, I didn't think it added anything, so I didn't. So if we want customers with the first name of Katie, we put Katie in here. What if we want customers who are named Katie, or who are named, or whose last name is Mitchell. Well, then we can do this. We have Scott Mitchell and Katie Hall now. So the way this works, it's a little algorithm that it uses. Access will go through, and it'll go through this line of the criteria. And anything that meets everything on this line, so customer with first name Katie and last name of, well, blank, so that doesn't restrict anything, blank, so that doesn't restrict anything, blank, so that doesn't restrict anything, all those records are included. Now let's go to the second line, or last name of Mitchell. And let's say, oops, I'm going to open up this table and try to construct a more complicated query for you. So let's say customers with a phone number that starts with, now let's not do that. Let's say customers with an ID above 5 and a sales handler of, let's say, trying to find something that'll really work with these restrictions here. Okay, let's say a customer with an ID below 4 and a sales handler equal to 4. So there are two customers with a sales handler of 4. And remember, this is the employee ID, so this is corresponds to a salesman, and we'll get to that later. But only one of them serves a customer with an ID less than 4. So to do this, we delete these names because we're not restricting on the names anymore. And we're saying we need to add something here. So we're going to add the customer ID. And I don't want to show it. If you uncheck this box, then the sales handler is not shown. And since I don't want it to be shown, I'm not going to check that box because I don't want to look at the customer ID. I think it distracts. I just don't want to. So if you want to use a criteria in your query, use a field in your query, but you don't want to show it, then you just uncheck that show box. So criteria here, I'm going to say customer ID less than 4 and a sales handler equal to 4. And then let's run that query by switching to datasheet view. Only one matches. Switch back to design view. And let's delete the customer ID criteria. And we see both customers that are handled by a sales handler of 4. So now let's say this is kind of a silly thing. Let's say instead we want to do a query on all customers whose first name starts with S. Well, the way to do that is to use what's called a I think it's clean or Klein think it's pronounced Klein. Klein star. You put a star here, and the star stands in for anything. So first name that starts with S, you have S star, because I want the first name to start with S, and I don't care about what happens after that. So I put a star. Now Access will always automatically fill in like S star here. And that's okay. You don't have to worry about that. Switch to datasheet view, and you have Samuel and Scott. Now you can do, because the phone number is a string, you can do this with the phone numbers too. Let's say you care about all phone numbers, for some reason, all phone numbers that start with 5552. Go back to the design view of this query, delete this first name has to begin with S criteria here, and say the phone number has to start with 5552. Like 5552, okay. Go back to datasheet view. We've got all of the phone numbers that meet that criteria. Back to design view, and let's say we want all the phone numbers that meet that criteria, or all of the phone, or any customer handled by a sales number with an ID less than 5. Let's say we want both of those for some reason. Design view, we want that criteria, or the sales handler with an ID less than 5. Because this is in the OR line, it's going to add those together. Well, now you've got all of those. Back to design view, let's say we want phone number starts with 5552 and the sales handler is less than 5. So now, because this is not in a separate row, it joins these two together. It conjoins them. It says, alright, so both of these have to be true for a customer to be included in the query. And there's only one, as it turns out, who meets both of those criteria. So, that's all for simple queries. So now I'm going to add a second table. Sales employees. And show you what happens when we do that. So the first thing that happens is, let's not use any criteria at all and see what happens. Well, because we've added this table, we can now add stuff from the sales employees. Sales employees dot, let's say, first name, and now sales employees dot last name, and now the sales employee's phone number, and the sales handler. So what's this going to do? Well, because of this line right here, this is called a join. And the way this join works is, this is a limitation on what is shown. What would be shown without the join would be every customer every customer's information and every sales number's information. So you would see customer 1, salesman 1, customer 1, salesman 2, customer 1, salesman 3, customer 1, salesman 4. I'll delete this to show you, actually. Let me go ahead and show this to you. You're going to see a lot here. So see, it's just going to be every customer associated with every salesman. Now, that's nonsense, because there's no reason you would want this, probably. And it's very, very big, because there are 10 customers, 10 salesmen. 10 times 10 is 100, and if you see, you have 100 records here, which is much bigger than either of the tables. So that's bad. So let's go back here and remove this table, and then put the table back, and it automatically adds that join there. Now, you can create that join on your own, and perhaps I should have. But, by the way, undo does not work very well in Access, so don't count on being able to use undo. So I'll put these fields back. Salesman.firstname, salesman.lastname, salesman.phone number, and we're leaving out annual sales. Now, with this join, what's going to happen is it's going to take all those 100 records, and that's what it's going to choose from. And out of those 100 records, it's only going to show those combinations where the sales handler field of the customers table match the employee ID of the sales employees table. So that's what that join does. And so let's look at it in action. Well, now we've got 10, because there are 10 customers. So we see Scott Mitchell is associated with Brian Smith, blah, 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 blah. We've got the customer's phone number. We've got the sales employee's phone number. You can use that trick in Excel that you probably know about, where you can just double-click on between here to make these columns as big as they need to be. And I am at risk of making this scroll off the screen, but it's worth doing. So this is now too wide to fit on the screen, but that doesn't really matter. So we've got all the customers, and then the sales handlers associated with them. Now this is called this is the most common type of join. It's called an inner join. Now, if we click on this, we can change the properties of that. The properties that are there by default are the properties we set up in the relations table at the beginning when we were first doing this. You can choose 3 kinds. You can only include rows where the joined fields are equal, or you can include all records from sales employees and only those records from customers where the joined fields are equal. So what this will do, this is interesting, this will include all sales employees even if they don't have any customers. Now this will include all records from customers and only those from sales employees where the joined fields are equal. Well, this actually wouldn't do anything different, because if you recall, because we set up that relationship, there's no way a customer can not be associated with some salesman. So 3 won't do anything different. 2 will. And 2 is called a left outer join, I believe. So now it's left because it goes from 1 to many. So yeah, so it is, I believe, a left outer join. But The terminology's that not important, and that's why I'm a little rusty on it, because it's not part of this class. But it's a database concept, so if you want to look up joins more, that's the terminology to use. You want to look at inner joins and outer joins. Left outer join, right outer join. They're similar, it just depends on what table you take it from. So this left outer join caused a few things to change. There were two salesmen who didn't have any customers. And so what happened was it just added rows for them. It said, okay, well, these two sales employees I'm going to put here because you asked me to, but they don't have any customers. So that's what that does in the query. Now that you have this, you can add additional criteria to work with. Here you can maybe restrict this for customers where the sales handler is less than 5. So if I do that, what am I going to get? Well, I'm going to get these 5 customers, these 6 records where the sales handler is less than 5. So we have, as it turns out, 2 from 1, and then 2, 3, and then 2 from 4, and that's it. So we get 6 records because we added that criteria there. And as it turns out, neither of the salesmen who didn't have any customers had an ID less than 5, so they weren't included. Well, they weren't included because they didn't have a sales handler field at all, actually. So what we could do if we wanted to include them is put the employee ID here, and it's not letting me choose that because I selected this from customers. So the table, trying to select the table here, sales employees, employee ID. So now we're using the employee ID instead of the sales handler field. But we get the same thing because those fields are the same thing. However, now what we can do is put a greater than 5 here. And we get those records from the left outer join here because the employee ID is greater than 5. And that's what we're selecting on instead of the sales handler. If we change this to the sales handler field, we're not going to get that. I accidentally pressed this over here, and so they went off the screen. So don't get confused by that. These are arrows, and the tables are typically in the upper left corner. So if you accidentally change that, it might look like they've disappeared. So if I put sales handler here, sales handler of greater than 5, I'm not going to get those fields because the sales handler field is blank in those fields. So this is kind of a corner case. The important thing to know is that this line is a join. Joins restrict what records are shown, or rather what combinations of records are shown. Once you have more than one table, you're not showing records from an individual table, you're showing, well, what's called in relations the cross product of these two relations. These tables are relations because it's a relational database, and what you're seeing is the cross product. So look up cross product if you want a little more of the mathematical background behind this. Otherwise, basically, have an intuitive understanding that if you don't have a line here, if you don't have any join, you're going to see those 100 records that we saw a while ago. And so what this does is it restricts, just like criteria restricts, it restricts which of those lines in the table, lines in the query, how many hits you have, how many lines are in the query. There are 100 possible, and so we're restricting based on that 100. And just like when we have one table, what it does is it selects every line in the table, every line in the cross product that matches these criteria. Then it selects every line that matches this criteria. And we should have a little bit of a better way to talk about this than line. Let's say every match. Let's use match instead of line. What I'm talking about are these lines here. So these lines are what the query returns. They're the output of the query. And so that's what I mean by matches. This restricts the matches. So it returns everything that matches all of these criteria. Then it returns everything that matches all of these criteria, and so on for every row in here that isn't blank. So here we only have one row that's not blank, and it's right here. If we want to restrict it further, we can say sales handler greater than 5 and customer phone number ends in 6, I'm going to say. So back to the design view, phone number, I want the customer's phone number to end in 6, *6. Remember, star matches anything, so if I want something that ends in 6, I say *6. And it changes that to like *6, and that's fine. Or I want the customer's first name to be Katie, let's say. Datasheet view here. I see this phone number ends in 6, this first name is Katie, so we get those two results. So this ends our section on queries, and so now I'm going to talk about forms. So I'm going to close this query, and it asks me if I want to save it because it's new. Yeah, I do want to save this query, and I'll call it customer join query. And so this is going to save. And you see now you have two sections. You have tables and you have queries. Now the next two topics are really not nearly as sophisticated as the query, so I'm going to go over them fairly quickly. First, I'm going to create a form. I'll create a form for the customers table using the form wizard, add all the fields to the form, next, next, and I'll open it to view or enter information. And it's going to take a while because this is over a network. Alright, so here's our form here. And so all this is basically a different way of looking at the information. So you have 10 records because we have 10 customers, and you can see them all, and you can add a new customer. So that's something important you can do with forms. You could add a new customer if you wanted. So let's do it just to, show how this works. Customer named Samantha, last name, let's say Adams, phone number 555-887, that, and sales handler. It will not let us add this form if we do sales handler of 0. So we have, just because we're entering it with a form, we're not off the hook trying to give them a valid sales handler. We can't navigate away from the form while the data on it isn't valid. So now customers magically changed. The customers, the table changed. And there are now more customers in customers. But to see that, we have to close it and reopen it. Now that we've closed it and reopen, see, Access is funny like that. You have to close and reopen things to see changes. Now that we've done that, we've got a new customer here because we entered it with the form. So now let's look at reports. Oh, and if you want to change the customer's form, if you want to change what it looks like, you can open it in the design view. If you open it in design view, it shows you stuff like this. Layout view shows it to you like this. So here, actually, this allows you to kind of change things. You can move stuff around like that. Change this too, move this around. This lets you change the form. Now, I didn't do a very good job changing this, so I am going to close this and say that I do not want to save the changes. So that's kind of your only undo, is you can close something and not save it. If you just open the form in normal mode, it's, for display and editing. So now let's close this. Now let's talk about reports. This is the last thing that I think you're going to need to know for the assignments. Go to Create and go to Report. And let's go to Report Wizard. And let's do one, and this time, since we did one for customers, let's do one for sales employees. Now, notice here, this is a way that you can make a mistake. It lets you select a query to create a report from. you generally don't want to do that. I'm pretty sure that you're going to be wanting to use tables, not queries. If you do need to use a query, if it does ask you to do that, make sure that that's what it asks you to do. But if you're not sure, use a table, not a query, if you're not sure what to use as the basis for your report. So I added all of the fields to the report now. And I'm going to go to next, 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 and I'm going to say that I want to modify the report's design here. And so this is going to open the report. It's going to create the new report based on that wizard. And it's going to open this up in design view. Now this works, you can change things like this, but it's easier typically to edit a report in layout view. So one thing that they're going to do in layout view is they're going to ask you to add a totals column. So if you click on this column right here, total annual sales, and you want to sum them, so see what everybody created there. This creates a total, and you can actually undo this here, which is kind of unusual. So we've got our employee IDs here, got our annual sales, and we've got this column. And in order to total it, all you have to do is click total, and it will create a total here. And so now that you've done that, you can go to open. You can open it in normal mode. Well, first you have to close it, actually. Save changes to the design, yes. And now we can open the report in normal mode, and it will show you this totaled. Now you might not be able to use this exact procedure to create the total. When you do it, there might be another way that it wants you to do that, and just looking at the textbook slides for that. But this does create an accurate total. It is one way to do it. They might want different formatting for your question, so be careful. But this should give you a nice start on what you do with reports. If you can change things in layout view, you can't quite see the E there. So if you move this over a bit, you still can't quite see the E, but you can make this bigger, move this over just a little bit, and change it so that the column is right there. This shows you all sorts of properties, which I don't think you're going to need to change. And then when you're done with layout view, you have to save your changes. And it's going to take a long time to save because it's over the network. And then once you've saved, you can open in normal view, but you have to close the layout view first. Now you can see that employee ID that was fixed a little bit, and this total is still down here at the bottom after all the employees. So that's all for this lecture. We've talked about tables, we've talked about queries, we've talked about forms, and we've talked about reports. For help with specific questions on the exams, you can ask on IRC or over email. I would recommend, before you ask, looking at the slides. There are 2 sets of access slides, one for each chapter, and there are 2 parts to the exam, ones for each chapter, so that makes it easier to look things up. Your Access project is not due until Monday, so keep that in mind. And after we're done with Access, we will start with Alice. So make sure you know where your textbook is, your Alice textbook is. I would recommend downloading Alice 2.4.2 and playing around with it. That's the version that we're going to be using. Make sure you can install it on your computer correctly and everything like that. Make sure everything's technically set up right as far as Alice goes. And I will talk to you more then. Alright, good luck on the Access exam, and goodbye.